Have you done away with the inner tube and started running tubeless yet? Well, in my opinion, it is the future, and I won't be going back. However, I do understand the uncertainty. I mean, how does a tyre work without an inner tube? And how do you set it up? Well, stay tuned, because I'm going to be covering it all. Now, of course, you'll all be familiar with the good old inner tube. You pop it in the tyre, pump it up, and voila, there we go. It's been around for about a century now. It's served its purpose pretty well, but it was only time before something new came along, and that something new is tubeless. In fact, it's actually been in cars and on mountain bikes for some time now. But as the name suggests, you're essentially running the tyre without a tube. Instead of that inner tube, you're now actually applying a bit of sealant inside the tyre, so should you get a small puncture, that sealant will seal it. I'll explain more on that very shortly, but first of all, what are the benefits behind tubeless? Well, you can run the tyres at lower pressures, meaning improved traction, better comfort, and believe it or not, improved rolling resistance. Since there's no inner tube, there's no friction between the tyre and tube, which may sound insignificant, but it's actually not. And as I mentioned, many punctures will self-seal. Sold? Yeah, I thought so. What are you gonna need then? Well, I guess the first biggie is a tubeless ready wheel set, like these. Now, a lot of wheels these days come tubeless ready, but it is obviously important that you check. If you try setting up a non-tubeless ready wheel set as tubeless, well, it may not end too well. Essentially, with the tubeless ready wheel sets, they're designed, or the rim is designed so that the bead of the tyre seats itself and is held firmly onto the rim. With that, you're gonna need some tubeless rim tape like this if it's not already applied. And basically that plugs those spoke holes and stops any air from escaping. With that, you're also going to need a tubeless valve like this. Pink is optional. And of course, you're going to need a tubeless tyre. Now, of course, these just look like your standard tube-type clincher tyres, and they more or less are. I guess the main difference is that these have a stretch-resistant bead within them, which, yeah, can make them slightly hard to fit at times, but means that the bead stays firmly seated even under pressure. And then of course you're going to need this stuff, sealant. In fact, this stuff from Muck-Off actually contains recycled rubber particles from recycled tyres, which actually helps with plugging some of those bigger, larger punctures. Right then, I guess that's it. I think all you should do now is throw all this together and show you how to set up your tyres tubeless. Okay, first up then, we want to apply some tubeless rim tape. You want to apply this tightly around the inside of the rim. As I said before, you're just covering up those holes for the spoke holes, etc. Fortunately, mine's already installed, so I don't need to do that. But just make sure when you do it, you're doing that really tightly all the way around. Next up then, we need to install the tubeless tyre. Now for this, you are going to need some tyre levers, because as I mentioned, the bead's going to be quite tight on this. All we want to do is just install one side of the tyre, and just a little tip here, you probably just want to put that bead into the centre of the rim, into the deepest part, just to help with getting it on. Right, so now that's on, time to install the tubeless valve. So, popping that through the opening here. Obviously make sure that your logo is aligned with the valve. Okay, so I've got this little washer here. What's going on? Okay, so now you've actually got two options here. So you can squirt the sealant into the tyre as it is now, or we can do it through the valve. I'm gonna go with the second, that's personally what I prefer. So for this, we actually want to install the other side of the tyre. This one might take a little bit more effort. Yes, in. Right, that wasn't too painful. I've got that on, and now it's time to get the bead of the tyre seated. So to do this, we're actually going to inflate the tyre before putting the sealant in. Now, depending on the tyre rim combo, energy levels, alignment of the planets, you might be able to do this just the standard track pump with some vigorous pumping. Otherwise, you can use a little booster like this. This will sort of give you a sudden burst of energy, similar to a CO2 cartridge, which you can also use, or a special pump. I'm gonna give just a normal track pump a go first, and if not, I'm gonna need the booster. Let's do it. And if it does get really stuck and you're struggling, like we are, we've got it partly seated here, you can apply a little bit of soapy water around the edge. Here we go. Yeah! Woohoo! Almost. Last little bit just over here stuck. Okay, so now it's all seated. I'm now actually going to deflate the tyre again, and then going to remove the valve core, either using a valve core tool, pliers, or actually they've got it on the valve caps here, so I can just easily remove that. And then we're going to put the sealant in. It could depend on the brand of sealant you're using, but Muck-Off suggests 30 to 45 ml of sealant. Obviously, make sure the valve's at the bottom. There we go. Cool, that's done. So now valve core back in. And then we'll inflate the tyre again. But this time, it'll be a little bit easier. But now that it's inflated, or you can obviously do this prior to inflation, but the sealant's in there, we want to spin the wheel and get that sealant around the tyre and coat it inside. Okay, so now you've seen it all set up, I guess the next thing to do is answer some of your questions and worries about tubeless tyres, which, to be clear, are all the same questions and worries I had before I made that conversion to tubeless setups. So first off, what happens when you get a puncture? Well, quite simply, the sealant will seal those holes and punctures. With the movement of the tyre, when you're cycling along, the sealant should work its way around the tyre and seal any hole that appears. The Muck-Off sealant has actually been developed as well so that it clings and coats the entire inside of the tyre, so you should get almost immediate sealing properties. And how often should you add tubeless sealant to your tyres? Well, this one I guess depends on how often you ride, but let's say you ride 1 to 2 times per week. Well, the tubeless sealant should last as long as your tyres do, providing the bike doesn't stay static unused for too long. How can I tell if my tubeless sealant has actually sealed a puncture? Well, it's actually going to be quite hard to tell at a glance, and depending on the size of the hole, you're probably only going to lose a few PSI through it, and quite often it's very little, you'll barely notice anything at all. But if you want to get really fancy with this, Muck-Off actually have a UV formula in their sealant, so you can shine a UV light on the outside of the tyre and see where it's actually sealed. Does it not add weight? Well, actually, most tubeless setups are usually lighter than comparable clincher setups with inner tubes. Obviously, you're getting rid of the inner tube, you are replacing that with fluid, sealant, but on the whole, that normally reduces the overall bike weight. But more importantly, it reduces rotating weight from the outside of the wheel. I've heard that they lose pressure. That is true. Some setups will bleed a little bit of pressure over time, but incredibly slowly. This isn't something you're going to experience over the course of 1 or 2 rides. In fact, you should just check your air pressure like you normally do with an inner tube. Will tubeless protect me against every puncture? Sadly not. Tubeless will do very well, obviously, but if the hole is too big or awkwardly placed on the tyre, it may struggle. In which case, you have 2 options. The first being just simply whacking a normal inner tube into the tyre and just running it like you do with a normal clincher inner tube setup, or you can use a tubeless plug. Well, there we go. Converted yet? Well, if you've got any more questions, drop them in the comments section down below. If you found today's video helpful, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe.